Welcome back to Fuel Up Classic. Now, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. It makes all the difference. And a massive thank you to each and every single one of you who've already subscribed, liked and commented on my other classic car videos. There's plenty more of them on the way as well. But this is the start of a new series of real-world living with reviews. And let's kick things off with a Maserati 4200. Seems like a great place to start to me. I first teased this car on my Instagram a few months ago, and loads of you seem to want to know more about it. Well, thankfully, the weather's finally improving, there's no salt on the road, and I can put some miles on this Maserati V8 supercar. But there's no denying these cars are a bargain for what they offer. But are they a bargain for a reason? I guess we're going to find out together. So join me in this first video as I take it out for a drive, and I'll talk you through my first impressions and a few things of what to expect in some upcoming videos on this very car on the channel very, very soon. So let's just start things off with a little bit of context, because my life isn't all Maseratis and expensive classic cars. I'm lucky enough that my entire life has been surrounded by a variety of classic cars, and it's shaped my passion and my career. But my daily driver for the last few months has been this diesel Volvo V70. I spend about 2 hours a day commuting to and from the office in this very car, hence why it's covered in all the road salt and muck and everything else that we get here in the winter months. And it's done a great job. But the one thing it doesn't do is get my pulse racing. And that's where the Maserati comes in. I know it's going to be a very different living with experience than the Volvo, but join me as I take it for a drive and I'll talk you through what it's like to be behind the wheel and my first impressions. So it only seems fitting that the very first journey is going to be to the petrol station. I feel like it's somewhere that I might be visiting quite often living with this car, but let's take it out on the road. And the first thing you'll notice with this car, and maybe it's my paranoia, turn it on and you have got a full illumination of warning lights come up as the car does its system check. And even now, I still have my fingers crossed each time that they're all going to go out. But I never need to worry, all the lights soon go out and you're greeted by that glorious V8 noise when it starts up. That's something that I don't think you could ever tire of, and the engine is really what this car is all about. So let's go. It's only a short drive to the petrol station, but we'll take it out, let everything warm up, get it fueled up, and see what it's like to live with. So now we're all fueled up. The engine's warming up nicely. I'm just about to go out on some really nice open roads, and I can just talk you through my first impressions of living with this Maserati. Oh, that sounds quite special just to say that in itself. But we can't shy away from the fact that this car has always kind of been seen as the underdog. When you compare it to a Porsche 911 or a Mercedes SL even, or perhaps a Jaguar XKR, the Maserati has always sort of been in the background. It's the left field choice that scares people away because they're worried that it's going to be hopelessly unreliable and just not an enjoyable experience to own. But when I started to research about these and talk to people that have really owned and loved these cars, I started to really get curious about it, and I was like, this is something that I really have to try for a while. So that's the reason this car is on the channel and why I'm going to try and live with it, to try and get to the bottom of whether some of those myths that you'll hear about them are true, and also just get a great detailed opinion of what it's like to live with, what's its quirks, what's its flaws, but also what's the pros. And I think the best place to start, seeing as we're sat inside it, is the interior. Because I have to say, I didn't have very high expectations. I thought perhaps it might be a little bit tacky in here, a bit thrown together. I might recognise the odd bit from other cars, but that's not really the case. Once you open these huge doors, and they are massive by the way, everything in here is soft touch leather. It feels like a really premium product, and it feels nice, it feels comforting in here. The seats are incredibly comfortable. They're obviously every which way electrically adjustable, so you can get into a really nice driving position. And perhaps the biggest surprise with it is just how practical this car is. There's a lot more space in here than I first expected. It's a genuine four-seater for adults, and neither the 911 SL or XKR Jaguar can offer that level of practicality. So that surprised me at first. You've got beautiful Maserati dials in front of you. They're such a nice thing to look at. It's really well done. It's stylish. You've got the Maserati clock here in the middle of the dashboard. The only thing that lets this car down now, and it's not really the fault of the car, it's just that this is a 20-year-old car or thereabouts. Of course, the infotainment system now is woefully out of date, but really, I don't care. If I need to use maps, I'll just use my phone like everybody else. I'm not going to use a 20-year-old sat-nav. And the radio and everything else, well, that's reasonable. It all works as it should. And I have to say, I've pressed every single button in here several times, believe me, to reassure myself, and everything works. Even the aircon is ice cold, so that's a pleasant surprise. I was expecting perhaps it would have a few electrical gremlins, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I know that some of you at home might be watching this going, that car's going to go wrong, and I'm going to laugh at him when it goes wrong, and that may well be the case. But first impressions, everything works. There's no warning lights, and I have to say, when I spoke to the previous owners of this car, it's never really given any trouble, but it has been very well looked after. It's got a fantastic service history at a very, very well-known specialist, and that helps. That helps for peace of mind. So many of these cars, you know, it's not just a case of a Maserati, but in particular a car like this, they don't get looked after. As the values plummet, people try and run them on a shoestring, and that's where you need to avoid it. You have to buy one that's been treated like somebody's baby. It's been absolutely looked after and pampered. And I have to say, with this car, it certainly seems to be. And let's just talk about this car in particular for a moment. It's a late 2004 build car. The 4200 ran from 2002 all the way through to 2007. So this fits sort of nicely in the middle of the production range. And the facelifted version, which I really wanted to live with, I think it's a prettier car than those originals. I think they just improved on. The grille and the rear bumper is different to the earlier models, and I think it just looks like a really fantastic looking car. I still find myself staring at this car going, it looks good. I think it's pretty. A lot of people will say it's not as pretty as its predecessor, the 3200, which had those beautiful LED boomerang lights, which they got rid of for the 4200. But I still think the rear three-quarter view of this car is one of the best on any car manufactured around the mid-2000s. So I love the way it looks. I love the interior, which is a really pleasant surprise. And of course, we've got to talk about that engine, because that's what this car is all about. It's what piqued my curiosity in them in the first place. It's a Ferrari-derived, naturally aspirated, 390 brake horsepower V8. Start it up on a cold morning, and it actually sort of sends shivers down my spine a little bit. It's a glorious note that this car makes. But keep it under 2,500 RPM and it's not very shouty at all. I'd actually say it's fairly quiet. But now we're all warmed up, I can just give you a bit of a brief glimpse into how this car has a bit of a split personality. If we drop it down now, we're doing 40 miles an hour. Drop it down to third gear, 3,000 RPM, put sport mode on, and just touch the throttle. And you simply can't drive this without a huge grin on your face. 20 years on, it is still incredibly fast. 0 to 60, sub 5 seconds. Top speed, 177 miles an hour. It's a properly quick car. And that V8, when you're up in the rev range, and we are nowhere near the rev limiter today, and I wouldn't treat it like that. It's far too damp. I'm far too new to this car to want to do that. But God, it sounds good. That noise is addictive, coupled to the controversial F1 style gearbox. And the reality is, if you're in the market for a 4200, well, the vast majority, in fact, I think it's about 5 to 1, will have the F1 style gearbox. Everyone wanted this back in the mid-2000s. They all wanted to be Michael Schumacher with an F1 style gearbox. But it was actually a gearbox that's always been a little bit controversial, and I can't deny other cars that I've driven much later on, you know, that have this style of gearbox are much faster, much more precise, and that's just the nature of the game. But it was my single biggest drawback with this car, and I think it's a reason that it puts a lot of people off buying one of these, and I think it's what's held values back. But I'm going to say this now, I was wrong to judge the F1 style gearbox in the Maserati without properly living with it. I'd read the reviews, and I'd read the reviews in period back in 2004, 2005, where they condemned this gearbox. And in actual fact, once you live with it, you learn its quirks, and it's really not that bad at all. The only time I have noticed where it is a little slow and dim-witted is in crawling traffic. It doesn't quite know what to do in those situations. It's a little clunky, and perhaps not quite as pleasant as you'd like it to be. Put it in automatic mode, and it's even more dim-witted. It's honestly not very good at all. I wouldn't bother. But stick it in sport, blip the throttle just ever so gently as you're going up through the gear change, and it smooths it out. And I am certain that this car changes gear much faster than if I was in the conventional manual, which, by the way, I have driven one of those very briefly, and the conventional 6-speed manual in this isn't that great either. So don't think that that's the one that's worth seeking out, because one, they're harder to find, and two, if you're looking for that gated Ferrari feel 6-speed manual, it doesn't offer it. And this car has had a new clutch in the last 3,000 miles. It's an expensive job on one of these, about £2,500. And it's been properly set up, so the gearbox is how it should be. And up and down the gears, it's not that bad at all. It's really not. If you've driven a Tiptronic 996 Porsche, well, they're not exactly great either. They're a clunky old gearbox as well. So I think we just got to put it down to the fact it's 20 years old, and we can't expect the kind of pin-sharp instant gear changes that we've got on modern gearboxes, because this simply isn't one. But it's perfectly livable. Everything except crawling traffic, parallel parking, that's a fun one. But if you can avoid those two things, completely fine. And if you want to bring that V8 on song, ride the revs like that, press the throttle, and the gear changes just get better. This car really, really comes alive when you give it a bit of spirited driving. It doesn't feel heavy, doesn't feel like it's gonna wallow all over the place. The one thing you are always conscious of though is it's a big car. It's wide, it's quite long, and it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, quite heavy. It's about 1,650 kilos before you've put fuel and passengers in it. So it's not a lightweight car. And I've just glanced down and we're currently doing 13.4 mpg. So that's the payoff. You can't have everything. And I'm certainly going to be getting to know my local petrol station staff, probably on first name terms, I imagine, as I cover more miles with this car. But what do you expect? This sort of thing doesn't come cheap. The running costs are high, but to obtain one doesn't cost the kind of money you'd expect. But join me in the next video as I take it out for a proper drive. I'm going to be commuting with it. We'll get it out on the motorway, see what it's like then, and I'm going to keep learning with this car, and you guys can join me on the journey as well.